You may not know it, but we are living through unprecedented times as baseball fans. For most of baseball history, we had a limited view of what made our favorite players the best, being relegated to looking at the back of their cards and going, hey, this guy strikes out a ton of batters, that makes him good. Or, hey, this guy has a low ERA, that means he's a good pitcher. Or, hey, this guy has a lot of wins, we should give him the Cy Young Award. But we can never explain why they were so good. Now, through the advancement of technologies such as Hawkeye cameras, as well as just keeping track of stuff that we associate with domination, such as inducing whiffs and weak contact, we can analyze every aspect of what makes our favorite player so good. Arguably, we figured out more on the pitching side than on the hitting side. So, while sitting in the back of a touring van, I asked myself, who were the best and worst Cy Young Award winners in the StatCast era? To start, I had to decide what metrics really captured the inner workings of true unfettered domination. Now with the Juiced Balls video, a lot of y'all got mad at me for having the gall to explain why I chose the metrics that I did. If you don't care about the why and just want to see the results, just skip to this part of the video. The timestamp is also in the description for your convenience. No worries if you skip, this is a judgment-free zone. I'll give you a few seconds. Okay. Now, for those who stuck around, I have a surprise. I just made all this up. I didn't actually spend countless hours compiling data to come up with an informative and nuanced list. That stuff is for losers. I just went based purely on vibes, bro. So, congratulations 2018 Jacob deGrom for putting up the best pitching season since 2015, and my condolences to Rick Porcello for putting up the worst. I'm just kidding. I did totally spend countless hours picking and compiling numbers, and here are the ones I chose. First off is primary fastball Stuff Plus. Stuff Plus is a stat that uses physical characteristics of a pitch, such as spin, velocity, and movement, in order to quantify its nastiness. One immediate issue is that what we know as Stuff Plus didn't begin tracking until 2020. So I kinda created my own version of it. Let's call it Dumb Stuff Plus. I essentially used the same ingredients that smart models use and distilled it down in a way to capture the meat of what we like to see. I then normalized it based on the other seasons in the dataset, so that 100 is average, the higher above the better, the lower down the worse. I then did the same with their main breaking pitch. Now, this was a bit more difficult. You see, good fastballs, even ones with different breaks, typically have similar profiles. So I can effectively compare apples to oranges. I don't get that luxury with breaking pitches. I noticed my model tended to skew heavy towards curveballs, so I had to introduce a nerf that put them on equal playing ground with sliders. The remaining metrics are pretty self-explanatory. Good pitchers limit barrels. XWOBA tells us who is the best at controlling the parts of a game pitchers are expected to control. XFIP- does that while contextualizing it to the league environment. Called strike whiff percentage is basically the percentage of called strikes and swings and misses. The best pitchers are typically the best at throwing or inducing strikes. And extension is a number I was originally going to throw into Stuff Plus, but figured to give as a category of its own. It shows us who is able to space jam their way into giving hitters the least amount of time to make a swing decision. And it's been found to be nearly as important as velocity in that aspect. As always, I ranked each pitcher for every metric and weighted accordingly. If you want a more detailed explanation of each metric, there is a link to a Google Doc in the description. And just remember, this is a bar napkin exercise. This isn't going to win you an argument against a front office executive, but you'll be the smartest guy at the Longhorn Steakhouse. I'm also not including 2020 for obvious reasons. So here are the 5 best and 3 worst Cy Young Award winners since 2015. But before we get to our results, a very special word from today's sponsor. So, as some of you watching are aware, I just got back from a 3-week-long tour, and we passed by so many stadiums while we were on the road. This made me long for going to a Braves game as soon as I got back. So, I decided to pull up today's sponsor, SeatGeek. Now, I'll be honest with y'all, SeatGeek was my ticketing app of choice even before they decided to sponsor me. Immediately, I found amazing tickets for an even better price. With their easy-to-use user interface and their 1 to 10 rating system, which allows you to see which seats you're getting the best deal on, I was able to pick out the best seats for the best price. And what do you know, I was watching Max Fried pitch as soon as I got back. Even better, if you use code NOMOREFIELDERS10 at checkout, even if it's your first or 500th purchase on SeatGeek, you will get 10% off your next order. So take out your phone, open the SeatGeek app, add code NOMOREFIELDERS10 to your account. Do it fast because this offer is only available for a limited time. Thank you again to SeatGeek for sponsoring today's video. starting off with a banger surprise entry. But in all reality, Jake Arrieta's dominant 2015 deserves all the love in the world, because it tends to get overshadowed by the ensuing conversations that were had surrounding who deserved the award between him, Clayton Kershaw, and his teammate, Donald Zachary Greinke. We will get to that conversation, but first let's talk about the man of the hour, because he absolutely deserves the spotlight for the kind of season he had. Jake Arrieta was a 5th round pick by the Baltimore Orioles in 2007, who was flat out not a good major league pitcher. Then at the swap of a hat, he turned into not only a serviceable pitcher, but an elite one. So what exactly changed? Well, from a pitch usage standpoint, the Cubs basically told him to ditch the fastball and changeup, 2 pitches with straighter movement, in favor of a sinker-slider combo, 2 pitches with great horizontal movement. One trend I've noticed while making this video is that there are several paths for a starter to find success, but one is to buck the trend. Out of all pitchers who threw a sinker at least 20% of the time in 2015, only 3 threw their slider more than Arrieta, all of whom had above average seasons for their career. But usage is only as good as the pitches they're executing. And boy did Jake Arrieta know how to execute. His sinker was the most valuable out of every other sinker that year according to run value per 100 pitches. And his slider was the 3rd most valuable. My model, in air quotes so heavy they might as well be radon, also seems to enjoy both the sinker and slider even if it's not over the moon for either. One number that my data is ecstatic about is his minuscule barrel rate. In fact, it's so low I can just list all of the barrels he allowed on screen. And my viewers with a keen eye will notice that 3 of them came in the same game against the Kansas City Royals. That's right, 23% of his barrels allowed came on May 29th against the eventual World Series champions. He was able to limit hard contact by bullying hitters in the zone with his sinker-slider tunnel, 2 pitches with similar spin rate profiles while having completely different movement, and always implanting the possibility of a changeup or curveball, both pitches that started in the zone before completely dropping below the table. Now that I got all of my Arrieta praise out of the way, let us quickly delve into the other 2 names that are instantly brought up every time this season is mentioned. This was less of a controversy, but more of a point of intrigue that arguably 3 of the best pitching seasons we saw at that point in the decade all happened to occur in the same season in the same league. Looking at some of the numbers I used in my quest to find the best Cy Young season, there is still no clear-cut victor. What really solidified Arrieta's case was him going on one of the best stretches in MLB history for a starter in his final 3 months of the season, even throwing a 12 strikeout no-hitter against Greinke and Kershaw's Dodgers on August 30th. I have learned throughout this that recency bias plays a huge role in voters' judgment, but to me, Arrieta's run transcends any potential argument over bias. His 0.41 ERA in his final 12 starts of the season was the lowest for any pitcher in the expansion era, beating out Tom Seaver, who had a 0.71 ERA in his 1971 season. Speaking of Hall of Famers, I do believe, if not for Arrieta's transcendent run, that Clayton Kershaw was the next deserving. No offense to teammate Zach Greinke, whose surface stats were a bit better, Jake Arrieta's season did spoil one of the most dominant 5-year stretches for a pitcher in MLB history, one that represented the future Hall of Famers' last real chance to secure the award for a 3rd time, to cap off the greatest peak we've ever seen in the 21st century after striking out 300 hitters for the first and only time in his illustrious career. But Jake Arrieta had other plans, and as you can see, he more than deserved it. Another surprise hit here. I gotta be honest, I am a certified Blake Snell hater. To me, he represents the death of the starting pitcher, being the poster boy for the 5-and-dive starter. And now, because of pitchers like him, the league is having these dumbass conversations in order to hamstring teams by forcing their starters to go at least 6 innings. It's not Blake Snell's fault though. If you ask him, he would want to go 9 innings every time he takes the bump. But that's not how his stuff plays, and managers have gotten really clever with his usage and exposure. First, let's see how he got here. Even with the nerf, my secondary dumb stuff plus loved his curveball. It broke more than any other Cy Young winners with the exception of one, while adding devastating velocity and spin. The other component of Snell's 2023 and his career as a whole is extension, tying with 2 other seasons as the most for a Cy Young winner. Honestly, and no offense to Snell here, but sometimes I forget he's 6'4". Is that just me? He clocks me more as a solid 6'2". Now the reason that Blake's style rubs me the wrong way is that he beats around the bush. I enjoy watching pitchers who attack the strike zone without remorse. Ones who say, here's my best stuff, I'm going to shove it in the strike zone, not try and hit it. Blake Snell doesn't do that. In fact, his in-zone percentage wasn't just the lowest for a qualified starting pitcher that year, it's the third lowest for any qualified starter since 2015. And I wouldn't exactly call the ones in his purview the cream of the crop. That is insane for a Cy Young Award winner. It's no surprise that he was only one of 2 pitchers who won the award while leading the league in walks allowed. For Blake Snell though, this was his game plan. His style is basically not giving in to the hitter. You see, when a pitcher falls behind in a count, they typically throw more balls in the strike zone, sacrificing movement for control. This was not Blake Snell's MO, however. In 2023, the league as a whole threw a ball in the zone 61% of the time in a 3-0 count. Snell threw one 50.5% of the time. He tended to up his attack compared to the league in 3-1 counts, but the theme here is that he'll accept walking hitters over giving up true damage. Now you may be thinking to yourself, hey, wait a minute, his barrel rate is kinda cheeks. Doesn't really seem like he did a great job of limiting damage. And this is where you, and I sometimes, have to understand that barrel rate is only a percentage of batted balls. That's the true epitome of Snell's game. His job is to eliminate contact at any cost. His CSW percentage is in line with the rest of these seasons, and that's not even appreciating the fact that his isolated whiff percentage was head and shoulders above the rest. If I decided to capture just that end of the spectrum in some capacity, Snell could have ranked even higher. In a list that has been full of surprises so far, this is the biggest one. I asked who would come out on top, and many of you threw this season up there, and for good reason. There's something so clean about that 1.70 ERA. It's a number that's looked up in reverie for the modern game, alongside Acuna's 40-70 season and Kerry Wood's 21 hit batters in 03. But what if I told you that it wasn't even the lowest ERA for a qualified starter in the decade? Or that Jacob deGrom maybe outperformed some of his underlying metrics? When I see deGrom's 2018, I'm reminded a lot of The Empire Strikes Back, a masterpiece, the best film in a legendary trilogy in fact, but a movie that isn't without some drawbacks whose reputation makes them difficult to point out. Don't get me wrong, Jacob deGrom's 2018 is still an amazing season, and Darth Vader's reveal to Luke is still one of the best twists in cinematic history. But there are some cracks in the otherwise impenetrable armor. For one, my Stuff Plus metric wasn't in love with his slider, a pitch that he finally perfected in 2021 before injuries started to rack up, one that I'm especially looking forward to seeing for the remainder of his career. The only other factors keeping him from the top of this list is that he didn't rank number 1 in any particular metric besides extension, in which he was tied with Blake Snell. He did outperform his ERA, and honestly, at the level deGrom is throwing, I don't believe it's as big of a deal as it seems. To be able to pitch to a below 2 ERA over the course of a full season, you need luck to be on your side. I just think it means that going into future seasons, you shouldn't expect that level of dominance. That wasn't until 2021. But that performance was so unsustainable that it was the genesis of a run of injuries that he's still dealing with to this day. Now don't get it twisted, this is still the 3rd best season in a group that includes 3 surefire Hall of Famers. It's just that it isn't the best season, which I know many of you came into this video expecting to see. I like to believe his season as a whole was greater than the sum of its parts. It was also the final nail in the coffin for looking at wins and losses to determine who the best pitchers are. The Mets went an absurd 14-18 in games started by Jacob deGrom. Think about that for a second. The Mets were given 32 starts in one of the greatest seasons of the 21st century, and managed to put up the same winning percentage of the 2023 Nationals in them. It's not even like the Mets were a bad team that year. They weren't great, but they had a better win percentage in non-deGrom starts. In fact, if his season ended on September 12th, he would have finished with a below 500 record. It took his final 3 starts in which he posted a 1.64 ERA and a 1.30 FIP for his record to edge over that mark. By the way, the amount of runs the Mets scored in those final 3 starts? 10. On April 10th, 2018, deGrom allowed 4 runs against the Marlins, aided by 2 base runners who reached via hits that had expected batting averages of, and I'm not making this up here, 80 and 40, respectively. This was the last time all season deGrom allowed more than 3 earned runs in a start. His run of dominance was so blindingly good that it overshadowed what could have been another great Cy Young debate. Both Max Scherzer and Aaron Nola threw arguably their greatest seasons in 2018. I mean, looking at their metrics head to head, it's clear that deGrom was on another level. but the margin for error stirring the conversation is razor thin. I know I've been yapping about DeGrom for too long, but really, I know as soon as I'm done talking about him, I won't be able to share these clips with you. But alas, it is time to find out the 2 seasons that somehow beat the unbeatable. Or sometimes beatable, actually mostly beatable. Look, if there's one complaint you cannot make, it's that my rankings are biased towards any particular archetype. One interesting trend that I noticed through analyzing these seasons is the evolution of pitching styles. Mid-2010 saw the rise and fall of sinker-heavy pitchers, giving way to the fastball slider bad boys later in the decade. Corey Kluber doesn't fit neatly into either category. Sure, he threw a sinker, but putting him in that box is a disservice to everything else he brought to the table. Plus, as you can see, my Dumb Stuff Plus formula hated it. What really made him unique was, well, a unique pitch. Pitch detection will tell you it's a curveball, but it didn't really have a ton of vertical movement for one. But its velocity and spin acted closer to a curveball than a slider. Nowadays, we would just classify this pitch as a sweeper and move on. But this pitch wasn't just unique for its profile, but for just how valuable it was to Kluber's arsenal. It is still by far the most valuable curveball since 2010, according to Sports Info Solutions Pitch Value, a top 10 list that includes Kluber's name 3 other times. It was a truly spellbinding pitch, one that stayed in the zone for just enough time before reversing course into the back foot of the left-handed batter's box. This is how Corey Kluber was able to manage not only the greatest CSW percentage on this list, but since we started keeping track of this sort of stuff in 2002. He had 4 separate weapons that he could mix and match against every type of hitter. What's strange to me is that even in the enigmatic career of Corey Kluber, this season stands out as an aberration. He posted a 34.1% K rate in 2017. His second best was 28.3% in 2014. Despite allowing fewer base runners than ever, this was the only season his strand rate eclipsed the 80% mark. Trying to find his secret that year keeps leading me back to his curveball. He set a career high in its usage that year, and it was as effective as it's ever been. When going through the numbers, we sometimes forget that at the end of the day, these guys are just humans trying to replicate movement and velocity on pitches that take a piece out of them every time they toss the pill. Even the man we refer to as Klubot himself eventually fell victim to this as he saw his Kluball ball become one of the least valuable curves in 2022, even if Stuff Plus still enjoyed its presence. I wax poetic because Prime Kluber was truly a special pitcher. Someone who existed independent of the paradigm shifts that occurred around him. One who stuck to his guns and wrote his formula to the very end. He was truly one of a kind. Before I reveal the best Cy Young Award winner of the StatCast era, let's take a look at the 3 worst. This one shouldn't surprise you too much, right? Robbie Ray was and maybe still is a good pitcher, but he's one of the names on the list that just feels out of place. The truth is that the AL crop in 2021 was not great, and this was really a 2-man race between Robbie Ray and Garrett Cole. According to voters, they weren't even close, with Ray receiving 29 out of 31st place votes. But in all reality, this should have been a tight race, and in my opinion, Cole should have won. Now, for voting purposes, surface stats should take preference. I don't care if pitcher Y had an expected ERA of 1.76 if his actual ERA started with a 3. When it comes to awards and all-star selections, players should be judged on results. But, and this is a huge but, if the surface stats are too close to call, then peripheral numbers deserve a place in the conversation. Yeah, he would have won with the lowest ERA plus since a pitcher who may or may not be mentioned in a second, but looking at their under-the-hood stats, it's just obvious that Cole was the better pitcher. Another controversial take, because we've already established that voters are biased, I think pedigree does and should play a part in the conversation as well. Sorry, I'm not saying it should be the first factor, but it should be considered. Robbie Ray was and has been a third starter who has trouble finding the zone, who happened to put it all together from time to time. Garrett Cole had been the best pitcher in the sport up to that point. Maybe it's the writers punishing Garrett Cole for Pete saking his way around the sticky stuff conversation.
I don't know. I don't know if I don't quite know how to answer that, to be honest.
Perhaps they even forgot about him after the greatest Yankees glowdown in franchise history. But to me, they just got this one wrong. Shifting the focus to Ray himself among the toasts of starting pitching, my Stuff Plus formula hated both this primary and main secondary. One can say it was absolutely disgusted by them. And hey, this is the first entry I can actually use the Smart People Stuff Plus. And will you look at that, the model was lukewarm on both of them. I love feeling vindicated. The only metrics that shined him in a favorable light were CSW percentage and extension. And even that leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Like bro, your entire game is predicated on the swing and miss, and you couldn't even stand out in that aspect. Moving on. This one honestly surprised me. First off, Sandy Alcantara, by the way, is it Alcantara or Alcantara? I'm just going to keep saying Alcantara because it's just easier for me to say. 100% deserved to win the Cy Young this year. The only other pitcher who topped him in ERA plus was Julio Urias, and fuck Julio Urias. I will also disclose that Sandy was the only pitcher whose secondary pitch I didn't use a breaking ball for. This was an executive decision, as not only did he throw his changeup more than his slider, it was just a way more effective pitch in several different ways. And honestly, my formula, despite it being built with sliders and curveballs in mind, really didn't hate it. Same story with the sinker. He was also middle of the pack in terms of barrel rate. So what gives? Well, he was pretty much stuck in the bottom of the pack for everything else. This is the first instance where disagreements can be made about how I evaluated all of these seasons. You see, when I made that sly comment earlier about my models not favoring one archetype over the other, I was being a bit deceitful. All those pitchers mentioned earlier used different formulas to reach the same conclusion. Even sinker baller Jake Arrieta used the old maximize the strikeout while limiting walks in the long ball formula to his advantage in 2015. Alcantara truly represents using a different formula to come up with a different conclusion. Xwoba didn't like him as much because even if a hitter puts 100 balls with an expected average of 1 into play, he'll still have a higher Xwoba than a hitter who strikes out in all 100 of his opportunities. It's just how numbers work. Sandy Alcantara is the sort of pitcher who's expected to outperform that number, but even then, the margin he outperformed in is basically negligible. CSW percentage doesn't like him because his game is centered on soft contact. He had no trouble finding the zone and getting hitters to chase pitches out of the zone. He just pitched in a way to induce soft ground balls. He allowed the lowest average on ground balls since 2011, and 54.2% of his at-bats ended with a grounder. That's just a very simple and effective formula for success that even the advanced numbers we hold so highly don't respect. Pitching in this way also allowed him to throw more innings than any other starter in the 2020s, a lead he has more than paced, and may not be reached again for a very long time. So even if I'm 99% satisfied with the results, this is the 1% I am not satisfied with, and I am totally open to scrutiny on this one. You all knew this one was coming. If you were hoping that my numbers would somehow trigger a reevaluation for Porcello's 2016 Cy Young campaign, well, then I hate to disappoint. I mean, for Pete's sake, he was the only pitcher on this list who had a negative run value on his secondary pitch. His xFIP minus sat at 92. That's 8 points away from merely league average. He was good, but not great. Now, for those of you who want some resolve, I will say the decision was not as clear-cut as some say it should be. A lot of people point to Justin Verlander, who actually received more first-place votes than Porcello as the rightful winner. But honestly, their seasons weren't as far apart under the hood as you'd imagine. Yeah, I still think Verlander should have won it over Porcello, but it's not like there's a foolproof case. Some say Zach Britton should have taken home the gold. But, and maybe this is a hot take to some, I don't believe relievers should win the Cy Young. It is a starter's award, and yes, Jason Smith should have won in 2003, even if he was shielded from facing the best hitter on the planet that year. No, the real winner should have been Corey Kluber. He represents a solid bridge between the arguments over both players. He did this while also leading the league in ERA+, even if it was the lowest number to lead his league in that stat since Joe Mays led in 2001. This basically meant that the AL in 2016 didn't have a truly dominant starter. Porcello was sort of picked from the crop on accident. Most voters agreed he didn't deserve to be the Cy Young winner, but he still won based on the system in place. Maybe ranked choice voting isn't the answer. Some food for thought for those petitioning for vote reform. And with all of that out of the way, I present to you our best Cy Young season in the StatCast era. First thought is, wow, look at where he ranks in all of these metrics. Something I've noticed from doing these types of videos is that whoever places first kinda just sweeps all of the categories, making a total mockery of them, and this video is no exception. My Dumb Stuff Plus formula loved both his cutter and curveball. Now, arguments about sticky stuff will come up, but I want to point out that he pitched to the tune of a 2.29 ERA and a 1.97 FIP after the ban happened in mid-June of that year. The Smart People Stuff Plus metrics seem to agree, as not only was it the highest rated cutter of 2021, not only is it the highest rated cutter of all time, it's the highest rated fastball of all time. His ex-WOBA was off the charts, partially due to his cracked 35.6% strikeout rate, but his ex-WOBAcon, which is taking a look at his expected weighted on-base average only for contact, was an incredulous 303. What's crazy about this is that he had insanely bad luck on balls hit into play, so his already impressive ERA should have been much lower. His xFIP minus is tied for the second lowest since it became a recordable stat in 2002. The only metric he didn't ball out in was extension, and even then he was fourth. The man only allowed 7 homers all season. Out of the 4 red-handed hitters he allowed homers to, 3 of them were players who received MVP votes, made the All-Star game, or should have had both if life was fair. He absolutely wiped the floor, and is the most unhittable pitcher to win the Cy Young Award in the StatCast era. So why is it that when he won, a lot of people, including me, thought Zack Wheeler should have taken the award home? That's because Corbin Burnes did all of this in a lot fewer innings than his peers. He qualified for the ERA title, sure, but he was a missed start away from not even being able to do that. He only pitched into the 7th inning 8 times in 2021. Compare that to Zack Wheeler, who did it 20 times. So yes, while in a vacuum, Corbin Burnes was by far the most effective pitcher every time he was on the mound, baseball isn't that simple. A lot of Corbin's success can be traced back to his manager, Craig Counsell, one of the most brilliant minds on the field's usage of him. If Corbin were to go into the 7th inning twice as much when he's facing hitters the 3rd or even 4th time through, would he have been as effective? Would his cutter lose its off-the-charts movement and spin as he pitched deeper into games? Would hitters pick up on the sequencing and have a better idea on how to read his pitches? I don't know. This brings up several fun arguments. I'm kind of glad now Sandy Alcantara got a mention in this video, because his and Corbin Burnes' seasons are so diametrically opposed for Cy Young winners. Corbin Burnes averaged 5.96 innings per start in 2021, while Alcantara averaged almost a full inning higher. In a 3-inning game, knowing nothing else about my team, I trust handing the ball over to Corbin Burnes more than anyone else. But baseball isn't played in 3 innings. It's a fun debate, and I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Being on tour, it's good to know that I can entertain a random van thought and it being received highly. So please like the video if you haven't already, and let me know your thoughts on the volume versus effectiveness debate. If you don't feel like chiming in, no worries. Give me another pitcher in the StatCast era who posted a dominant season without winning the Cy Young Award, who you'd like to see compared with these guys, and eventually I'll get around to adding a few and sharing where they placed.